Hey everybody, I hope it's going great. In this short video, I want to talk to you guys about the CSS property display. In order to explain this, I'm going to create a couple of elements that we're going to play around with. So we're going to create a paragraph which has the text paragraph 1, and this paragraph is going to have a class set equal to 1. And then we're going to create a paragraph 2, and this paragraph is also going to be assigned to the class 1. Now within the style tags at the top of our HTML document, we're going to add a couple of lines of CSS code. Remember, to select elements of a specific class in CSS, you need to use a full stop before the class name. So to reference the first two paragraphs which are assigned to class 1, we can write full stop 1, and then within curly brackets we can write the CSS properties which we want to apply to the two paragraphs. In order to make the layout properties visible, we're going to add a background color which is going to be light blue. In the browser you can see that the first two paragraphs which we added now have a beautiful light blue background. So now let's move on to the property display. By default, paragraph tags have a display set equal to block. So in other words, that means you do not explicitly need to set the display property to block for paragraph tags. And this default value also applies to div tags, H1 to H6 tags, forms, headers, footers, and sections. So if over here we go ahead and just set the display to block, you will see that in the browser nothing changes. Alright, so there are two things that you should know about this display property. The first thing is it always takes up the entire available width. You can see this in the browser because the blue background expands over the entire width of the window. And the second thing that you should know is that these elements always start in a new line. And you can also see this in the browser because the elements are stacked on top of each other. Moving on, let's have a look at the display property inline. So we're going to create a new paragraph which is going to say paragraph 3, and this paragraph is going to be assigned to the class 2. Over in the CSS, we're going to select this paragraph and we're going to give it a background color of gray. So at the moment, the display property of this element is set to block by default. Now watch what happens when we change the value of this display property to inline. This element no longer takes up the entire width of the screen. It only takes up as much space as is necessary to display the element. And that is always going to be the case. Even if you set a width and a height, that will not have an effect over here. Now another thing that you should know is that these elements do not always start in a new line. So that means if I go ahead and add another paragraph, which is paragraph 4, you can see that this paragraph is displayed right after paragraph 3. You can also set the display value to Inline-Block. In contrast to inline, the height and the width values that you apply over here do have an effect. Let me show you that. So currently the paragraphs of class 1 are set to Inline-Block and the paragraphs of class 2 are set to inline. So now if I add a height and a width value to an element which is Inline-Block, you can see that this does have an effect. Doing the exact same thing with the inline item, you'll see that this does not have any effect whatsoever. Next, let us have a look at the display property none. This is a pretty easy one to cover because it's pretty intuitive. Let's go ahead and change the display property of all elements that are assigned to the class 1 to none. You can see as soon as I refresh my browser, the first two paragraphs are gone. So the display property none does pretty much what you would expect it to do. It just does not show the elements. Now some of you might be wondering why we would ever use this. Why would someone go through the effort of creating an element that is then not shown? And the answer to this is pretty simple. You use this in combination with JavaScript whenever you want to toggle an element on or off. A good use case for this would be drop-down menus, for example. One thing that I do want to mention here is that many people get confused between setting the display property to none and setting the visibility to hidden. The difference between these two is as follows. If you set the display property to none, the element is not displayed and it doesn't take up any space. If you set the visibility to hidden, as I am doing right now, and refresh the browser, you will see that the element isn't displayed, but it still takes up the same space as it would if it were displayed. So if we have a look at these two property values side by side, you can see that if the display is set to none, the element does not take up any space. If, however, the visibility is set to hidden, the element still does take up the original space. Alright, so we're going to leave it here for this video. If this video helped you out, make sure to leave a like and see you in the next one.